My name is Rob Campana. I'm the league president, and I'm joined by Alex D'Aquila, aka Eagle, who is here with me as well. Eagle, say hello.
Hello. I'm sick, everybody.
So yeah, if you hear coughing throughout this presentation, you'll know where it's coming from. So basically, thanks for joining us tonight. What I'll be doing is going through a quick presentation similar to the one that I've done in the past, last year, the year before. Obviously, there's some new additions as well. I'll be going over a lot of the rule changes that were voted in by the Rules Committee in early December. And of course, if there's any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to write them in directly into the YouTube chat. Eagle will interrupt me, ask the question whenever pertinent, and he and I will both be happy to answer the questions and try to get you as much information as possible. So again, this presentation, the purpose of it is very important that at least one person on your team, ideally the captain, be watching this, understand the rules of FPF. Not only do we have a ton of rules to follow on the field, but off the field as far as roster management and stuff like that, with the player caps, all that system in place. It's fun. It helps make the league a lot more balanced. It adds a lot more structure, but at the same time, there are a lot of rules to stay on top of. So it's important that you as team captain understand these so that we don't have to be chasing you all year round, and that you're not losing games by forfeit and stuff like that. We don't like that. Obviously, teams don't like that. But rules are there for a reason, so we have to abide by them. So the point of today's presentation is so that we clarify them as well as possible. So if we jump onto the first slide, quick introduction. So as I mentioned, we're heading into the winter 2018 season, which is our 14th year of operation for FPF, our 27th season. This winter we have 211 adult teams registered, split into 11 divisions. There are a few new divisions, which I'll get to in a sec. So jumping ahead to locations and nights, obviously all the people who registered filled out the Sked Builder form a few weeks ago, so you're aware of the nights and breakdowns. But again, we have games on Saturdays and Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays, and then for 35 plus exclusively on Thursdays at the locations that you see here below. So next up, some important dates for you to remember. Veteran FPFers know that week 2 every year we take the team and individual photos. As you can imagine, trying to take the pictures of 211 teams, especially when we don't get certain teams and then we have to chase them the following weeks, makes things extremely difficult logistically. So we ask for your cooperation. We do understand that some teams won't have their uniforms ready by then. They'll be missing some players. We totally get that. We ask you to still, collaborate and help us take your team picture, take the individual photos. And then if we catch you later in the season, myself personally, I'll be happy to take your team picture again and update it on the site with your new uniform or with your full roster or whatever the case may be. So that's in week 2. We ask that you please arrive a little early, that you cooperate with the photographer on hand. In some cases it will be me, in other cases it won't, but that's it. So that'll happen in week 2. In week 3 is when the registration fees are due. A lot of teams ask us when they have to pay, if it's the first week or anything like that. So it's always the last week of January that fees are due. So we ask that you please respect our timelines and stay on top of that. Week 5 and week 6 is the last chance to add playoff eligible players. Why it's 5 or 6 is because some teams do play in week 5, others have a bye and they play again in week 11. But essentially, players have to play in 6 games, which we'll get to a little later, to be considered eligible for the playoffs. That's for all the men's numbered divisions. For co-ed and for 35 plus, that is 4 games out of 8. So you can take note of that. Super Bowl blackout, we do not have any scheduled games for our adult divisions for Saturday, February 3rd or Sunday, February 4th. There are some 35 plus makeup games on Saturday, February 3rd, however, but everybody else is off. The regular season ends on Sunday, March 18th this year. And the playoffs will begin on the Wednesday thereafter. We'll get into the playoff schedule in a second as well. And then the championship finals to be determined. It's definitely going to be the weekend of the 7th and 8th of April. It's just a matter if all the games are going to be on the Saturday or if we're going to split some over the 2 days like we did last year. So over on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, player ratings have become, it's going to be, I believe, the 4th or 5th year that we use the player ratings. What essentially for people who are new to our league and are wondering what this is Flag Plus Football's way of assigning a grade or a numerical value to each player in the league, something that you don't really see in many recreational leagues. The purpose of this is to try to really balance out divisions, avoid teams that are way too strong from participating in lower divisions. So we feel that it's worked quite well over the last few years. It's helped add some parity to all the divisions. So as you can see here, the division that, or I should say the cap number that's associated to your division, you can see here. So starting off with Division 1 at 560, working all the way down to Division 6 and 6D, which are both at 375. What this means is these are unique to both offensive and defensive side of the ball. So Alex, if you can just go onto the website and show people the roster verification form, and they'll get an idea of how exactly this works. So if you add player names to the table, just random names if you don't mind, you'll see that how the system works essentially is that it takes the top 6 players into account. Only 6 players. The reason we do this is because we didn't want to punish teams that had larger rosters vis-a-vis teams who had smaller rosters. We don't want to start adding loopholes where people, if we took an average of all the players, we wouldn't want teams to start adding lower rated players to kind of lower their average. So what we decided upon 4 or 5 years ago when we came up with this this whole process was it only took the top 6 offensive and defensive players. So as you can see here with Alex, anybody who counts towards the cap is highlighted in green in that table, and anyone who doesn't count in the top 6 is highlighted in red. So as I'll mention in a bit, it doesn't matter which side of the ball people play. The FPF system or the table doesn't take into account your roster or who plays where. It really only measures the ratings that we have. So if someone is in your top 6 but doesn't play offense, a lot of captains will write to us and say, well, this person doesn't play offense, so does he still count? The answer is yes. If they are in your top 6, then whether they're on that side of the ball or not, in your scheming and in your roster, they will still count. So that's how it works. And as you can see, the number, if we go back to the template that we were showing, if you surpass that number on either side of the ball, so both sides of the ball count. It's not an average. If you're a little above and then way below on another side of the ball, that doesn't matter. You have to be below the cap on both sides of the ball.
And Rob, on that note, you can have players substitute for you when you're missing a player, and as long as you're underneath that cap, you're good, right? It's per game that you have to meet the cap.
Yeah, very good point, Alex. So what some teams say is, hey, I'm looking at this team's roster and they're way over the cap. But how it works is it's, like Alex just alluded to, it's not per season, it's per game. So your full roster may be over the cap, but that doesn't matter. It works on a game-by-game basis. So as long as you never surpass the cap in any game specifically, then that's what counts. Alex, if you can go back to the site just to show a new feature that we have on our website. So if you click, let's say on a game from spring 2017, and you go to the box score, you'll so in any division, if you're able to go to the schedule and then click on a game report,
it's coming up.
Perfect. So you'll be able to see that something we added last summer is that you'll be able to see all the players who participated in the game, all listed, and you'll be able to see if the team violated the cap or if they respected it. In addition to the QB cap, which is something different for each division, that you can't have someone with a certain quarterback rating or offensive rating, if they don't have a quarterback rating as well, surpass that cap. So Alex, I mean, you can explain what's on the screen there.
We're going to have to talk to the website guys, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but anyway, so that's a feature that you can use after your game if you want to double check. You don't have to do that manually anymore.
And Rob, one more question I have for you. For people in 4A and 4B or 5A, 5B, there is a 10-point difference in cap.
Yeah.
And this is on purpose. Yeah,
exactly. So the reason we did that, Alex, and it's a good question, is that when people register for 4 or for 5, before we split them, they register for the cap, for instance, for Division 4 as an example, is 445. So teams have to fit under that. But once we split the division into 2, we actually reset the cap for 4B at a lower rate, which everybody fits under. And the reason we do this after the fact is because we wouldn't want teams to basically have a lower cap at the beginning when we split the teams up, and then once they end up in B, then they can stack their roster to be a little stronger. Obviously, we don't want people to game the system, so once the lower cap comes into play, well, then that's set for your team, and you can't surpass it at any point during the season. So good point, Alex. All right, so moving on. Next step, if anybody has a question about that, feel free to write us a quick note there on the YouTube chat. Next up, any new FPF member will receive the base rating for new players based on division. So what this means is if you bring someone new off the street, as people could understand, there's no way for us to assign a rating to a player who's never played an FPF before. So what we do is we give them a base based on the division that you are bringing them into. So we're assuming if you're bringing someone into Division 1 that they are capable of playing in Division 1, and hence we give them an 80 rating. Same thing working all the way down. If you bring someone in Division 6, then they'll have a 55. Once they play a full season in FPF, then they'll be put into the same program as everybody else, and they will essentially receive a more accurate rating. But for your first season, you kind of get that free pass where you get this base rating. Now, one important note is that if someone plays in 2 divisions in their first season, so for instance, Alex D'Aquila is new to FPF. He starts playing in Division 4A or 4B, whichever, same thing. And then he also plays in Division 6. Well, what we do is we actually give him the lower of the 2. So we give you the benefit of the doubt and say, we'll give you a 55 since you're playing in both divisions. So moving on to the next slide. Player ratings. So quickly, as I mentioned a little earlier, the no defense rule in game policing. So if someone says, my quarterback rating or offensive rating is X, and then my defensive rating is something else, but it puts us over the cap. If I'm not playing defense, do I still count? And as I mentioned earlier, the answer is yes. There's no way to disguise or hide anybody's defensive rating. Offensive is a little different because we do give you the permission to seek out a second offensive rating, one specific for quarterbacking. But on defense, there's nothing like that. So unfortunately, whatever your defensive rating is what it is, and it works in all divisions.
Regardless of whether you're on the field or not.
Exactly. So if someone, for instance, and we see this a lot where guys who are maybe Division 2 or 3 players who have a defensive rating around, let's say, 80, and then they decide they want to play quarterback in Division 6 with some friends, so they get a QB rating which is much lower, but then their defensive rating causes an issue for their team rating in Division 6, but unfortunately, whether they play offense, whether they play defense or not in Division 6, there's no way for us to lower their D rating because they're not on the field. So that's just something to keep in mind. Roster verification table, we looked at it a little earlier. Alex showed you how it works. This is a very, very important tool that essentially we encourage captains anytime that you add a new player to your team, whether it's a sub, whether it's anything, you should always go back to the roster verification table and check it out. Some guys have the bad habit of just using the calculator on their phone, putting in the guy's ratings and adding it up, but you have to remember that sometimes the opportunity balance between removing someone and adding someone else, basically anytime you make a change to your roster, there is a chance that you miscalculate, and you don't want to end up forfeiting a game for something that takes so quickly to verify.
And those cap ratings for the divisions are actually on the roster verification tool, and it'll scratch them out as you hit them.
Yeah, so it's very simple, very easy. We list here a few golden rules when adding a player, just our kind of tips that everybody should use, and you'd be surprised. It happens relatively often, especially with new teams that they misunderstand the rule or whatever, and they end up break the rule. And I would say 9 times out of 10, when someone violates a rule in FPF for their roster where we have to give a forfeit, the teams are never trying to cheat. The problem is that they're maybe not really fully understanding the rule, and by mistake they violated. But unfortunately, we can't take intent into account when it comes to forfeits. If you break a rule, unfortunately, you have to understand that you have to live with the consequence of a forfeited game. So the golden rules here are: what is your player rating? So when you're adding someone new, they're at the field, especially if it's someone you're stuck, you want to add someone. FPF, I should note, doesn't have some kind of, so there's a lot of soccer leagues, hockey leagues, that player needs to be on a roster 24 hours before a game or something like that. We don't have that. We understand that sometimes things happen. You're scrambling for a player. You're more than welcome to grab someone at the field, add them to your roster, but it's important that you ask them what their player rating is if they already play in FPF. How many teams do they play on? And do you play in my division, most importantly? Because players, that's like the golden rule of FPF. You're not allowed to play on 2 teams in the same division, and that counts for 4A and 4B together, 5A and 5B together, and 6 and 6D together. Very important you know that. A little tip I'll give you, Alex, if you can go to any player profile. So if you go to a player's page, there's a drop-down menu right next to the person's picture. And there you'll see the names of the teams that they're currently on. So if you see three teams listed in that drop-down menu, that's kind of a hazard saying this person is not eligible to play on your team. Now, unless they've been released, which is possible, or they may be on an FPF junior roster that they're coaching, they may be playing on 35 plus or co-ed, which doesn't count against the 3 max. We're just talking men's numbered divisions, but still, just take a look and see. Do a little research, because again, as captain, it's your responsibility. If the person misinformed you, it's kind of sucky, but there's no way around it. So that's it. So, and also I should just mention, and for all the co-ed captains that are watching this, they've been emailed, I believe it was yesterday, with a rule that's specific to them, because they have a rule in place where you cannot have 2 players rated 85 or higher on the field at the same time. So that does require some in-game policing as far as captains and stuff like that. So for co-ed, things will be a little bit different for you guys. Referees are not responsible to know players' ratings. The scorekeepers don't always know the players' ratings. So it's really your responsibility when you're playing a team to understand who's on the roster and who is above that rating, and then keep an eye on it and basically call a technical timeout, as was explained in the email, should you want to report the breaking of a rule.
And for everyone else, this is not something that will be coming to regular FPF leagues in terms of the in-game policing. We're doing it specifically for co-ed because of the co-ed regulations.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So that's it. The responsibility is yours as a captain, guys. It's you know, we see it all the time, but it's really important that you stay on top of things. A lot of guys that float around from team to team, either A, don't really know the rules, B, are just lost, or C, they don't really care and they just want to play as many games as possible. So as captain, it's really important that you do your homework before you add someone to your roster. All right, moving on. So if we look at playoffs, this will be very quick. We just have a table here with all the divisions listed and the number of teams that qualify. Alex, there's also on the website now, you can show the teams. I guess you can walk them through it in the overview section. So sometimes people will email us and ask us how many teams make the playoffs, how does it work, how do the tie breaks work. Well, Alex can kind of show you where you can find that information.
So if you go under any of your division, you can go. I'm giving 4A as this example, but you can use any one. There's a section here where you see your division standings, and you see, for example, Conference A, Conference B, etc. But there also is the tiebreak info, which gives you the breakdown of what criteria we're using to actually establish a tiebreak between either 2 teams or 3 or more teams. You can read through this. Each division is slightly different, but more or less it's usually the same. And then on top of that, we also have the playoff breakdown, which shows how they're going to be seeded within the actual grouping itself. And then as the season goes on, we'll actually have a tab which will show the actual ordering of the teams. So it's something you need to calculate yourself. It'll show up during the actual regular season.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So so that's pretty much it for you know, ratings and that type of stuff. Before we get into some administrative stuff, one document that I think that most captains should be familiar with. Again, if we go back on the FPF website, if you navigate the main menu and go to resources, you'll see there's a document there right under the rule book, both in English and French, which are obviously important documents. After that, you'll find the roster regulations document. This is an extremely important resource for you. I strongly suggest that every team go through this document. In there, you'll see a full breakdown of forfeits, of cap breakdowns and explanations. Releases. So a lot of the stuff that causes the most grief for captains as far as just being complicated, everything is really well broken down in that document, and it'll really explain it much better than we will now over the quick 60 minutes that we're on the air. And of course, even while you watch this, if you kind of breeze through it, if you have any questions, of course you can ask us as well. But this is a really important document that each captain in FPF should have read and should, of course, understand. So moving on to league administrative reminders. So we'll start off with uniforms. So what exactly is the protocol? So actually, again, Alex, if you can please go back to the website. If you go under information, on the main menu, you'll see something that says League Info, and then the fourth category on the sub menu is Uniform Protocol. And in there, again, you'll have a breakdown in detail of what we expect from teams and what we ask you to abide by. Now, if we go back to the PowerPoint slides, just to say, basically, our league, we're not obliging teams to have super fancy uniforms, spend a ton of money. We understand that some teams, especially teams that are kind of fresh to the league and want to see if they like it, see if the group is a good fit before they kind of invest in uniforms. We're not asking you to drop a ton of money on uniforms. We're just asking that you respect our policies as far as wearing the same color jersey, wearing clear numbers on the back of it. It's just a certain minimum it's a standard that we ask that you upkeep. It kind of gives the league a certain image as well, instead of guys coming in just wearing whatever with no number. And then obviously for our scorekeepers, it makes their lives a little easier. Stats are a big part of FPF. Obviously, stats dictate ratings and so on and so forth, and people take pride in their production. But we have a rule in place where if you do not wear a number on the back of your jersey, or if it's taped on or markered on, then unfortunately we cannot take your stats. Some leagues are very strict and they say if you don't have a jersey, you cannot play. I personally played in a hockey league where someone was forced to not play in a playoff game because they forgot their jersey. We're not that strict. We're not that dogmatic. But at the same time, we have a rule in place. And if you don't respect it, there has to be some kind of penalty. And for us, it's not giving you your stats.
And Fleck Plus does work with Sportier as our official provider of uniforms. They have a variety of different kits that are available. You can make them super fancy, or you can just get basic jerseys with just a number in the front or back. That doesn't mean you have to use Sportier. I mean, you can go to Sport Experts and buy a bunch of jerseys there. You can go to Old Navy and scanning, get them printed. I mean, there's a variety of options available to you that are cost effective.
And what I always mention in the email to captains before the season is really I suggest trying to avoid cotton t-shirts. I've seen teams that not only for budget purposes, some teams will actually spend a decent chunk of money on, cotton t-shirts with a nice logo in the front, multicolored with their name and numbers in the back. But unfortunately, due to the nature of our sport with guys, tugging at your hip and trying to pull off a flag, sometimes they'll get a piece of your jersey, and with cotton shirts, they just tend to rip. So it's really not worth your money, especially if you're going to go all out and try to get something nice. I always suggest a dry fit fabric or something sublimated or some kind of tackle football knitted jersey. That's the way to go, because with cotton shirts, you'll probably have them for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'll turn into belly shirts. So getting back to the list here on the PowerPoint. So we do supply pinnies. Each scorekeeper at FPF has a set of pinnies on his field that we use for color for matching for teams that are wearing the same color jersey. Of course, in week 1, even week 2, where we know some teams are still waiting on their uniforms from Sportier or anywhere else, we're happy to kind of provide them as an emergency. What we don't allow, though, is for teams to just say, hey, we're going to wear pinnies all season long, because it's just free and convenient. It becomes very difficult for us. Obviously, you won't be able to have the same number every week. It's going to be difficult to input your stats because it's confusing for the guys doing it. So there are some teams that have tried to do that in the past, and we will absolutely not permit a team to do that. So we're happy to lend them to you in emergency situations, but we ask that you please don't take advantage of that and try to use the pinnies all season long. Again, like I mentioned earlier, matching jerseys and numbers, very important that you abide by that. Players without numbers will not receive their statistics. Adding players to your rosters. So it's very simple. What you can always do is you have 2 options. You can either email FPF, so info@flagplusfootball.com, with a player's name that you'll be adding to your roster at any point during the week or whenever, and we'll be happy to do that. In fact, we encourage it because there's no risk of a typo or anything like that when we take into account handwritten rosters. But otherwise, all we ask is that you include your new player's name on the roster sheet that you give to the scorekeeper, which is required prior to each game. And that's pretty much it. In the past, you would be required to submit a player contract, but as you see here, it's not applicable in 2018, so that's great. We don't have to force players to sign waivers anymore, so that's good news, and it's less work for the captains. Alex, if you can just go back to the website, and if we go back to the main menu and click on resources, you can maybe show teams under forms where they can find the game roster card. So a lot of captains will email us and say, like, is there a specific piece of paper we have to give to the scorekeeper? You can pretty much write your roster on any piece of paper, but if you really want to go by the official document of FPF, you can just download this game roster card, print it out, cut it up, and submit it each week. What some captains do is they'll print out their roster electronically and then just photocopy it and hand that in each week and scratch off the players that aren't there. That obviously makes your life easier. So that's that. Very important, we ask you when you arrive at the field, if you already have your roster written up. Some captains don't know, and they just think that they don't want to bother the scorekeeper. They'll bring their roster card read as their game starts. But if you actually are able to bring your roster to the scorekeeper before, while you guys are warming up, changing, as someone who scorekeeps myself from time to time, it's really, really helpful when you have the roster in advance. You can kind of fill it out, while in between plays of the game before, and it kind of lets the scorekeeper prepare himself a little earlier.
Also, referees will not start a game if the scorekeeper is not ready with that, so you're losing game time and potentially taking a penalty. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's important. I mean, we require you, just like you would see in a baseball league or a hockey league. I mean, we need your roster before the game, so that's just the standard that the league has. It's very simple. We just ask that you write it out on a piece of paper and bring it to the scorekeeper. But like Alex said, the game won't start unless the rosters are in. So that's it. Next slide, roster regulations document. We mentioned this a little earlier, so we went through it. You know where to find it. Very important. I suggest you go through it. Moving on to the next slide is the player releases. So again, this is explained in detail in the same document we just referred to, but just as a reminder, they're only effective at the end of a week. So what that means is a Flag Plus Football week runs from Saturday to Wednesday. So if someone plays in Division 2, for instance, on Saturday, asks for a release from that team the following day, they wouldn't be able to jump on to another Division 2 team on the Monday or Wednesday. They have to let the week complete, and then they can essentially, their release goes through on the Thursday, and then they can continue on for the following week of football. Last week to release a player is week 7, so that's inclusive. So at the end of week 7, you are permitted to make a move, but after that, week 8, 9, 10, and 11, player releases are no longer permitted. And remember the objective of the player release. It's there for guys who, you guys are paying to play in this league. If you end up starting off on a season, you realize it's not a good fit, or for whatever the case may be, we're not forcing you to stay with someone. We're giving you the opportunity to ask for a release, go play with someone else. You can also help a team out one game and get a release. But it's not there to kind of, like leave your team and then come back to it and all this funny stuff. That's why we put a maximum of 1 release per player per season. So very important that you respect that as well. That's it. There's a blurb about injured players that we ask for. If you expect a game played but you are not at the field and checked in with the scorekeeper, then we ask for a doctor's note as proof of like a serious injury or operation or anything like that. Otherwise, we ask you to still be at the field. Something very important that I want to point out is if you are someone who's looking for credit for an injured game, which is great because you don't count against the cap for your team, you still get a game played. I actually encourage a lot of teams, and we've seen this more and more over the years, Alex, is that we see a lot of forfeits in the first round of the playoffs because a lot of teams run 7 deep or 8 deep. They have a very small roster, and then the first week of the playoffs, someone is injured, another guy can't make it, and before you know it, they're 5 guys. So what we suggest is if you have a friend, if you have someone that comes to the field, watches some of your games, you could actually put that person down on your roster as like under the injured tab, essentially, where they don't count against the cap, but they need to check with the scorekeeper. Some guys will contact us right before the playoffs and say, oh, the guy was there in week 4 and week 7. Unfortunately, we're not going to play that game where we have to go back and ask the scorekeeper, do you remember seeing this person? They were wearing a blue jacket. Obviously I'm being facetious, but it's your responsibility. If you want the game played, you need to go check in with the scorekeeper and say, hello, I am this player. Here I am on the roster. I'm here. If you don't mind giving me my game played, and I'll go about my business.
Rob, we got a quick question about the actual game roster sheets.
Yeah.
The document has 6 copies. There are 10 games in the season,
Yeah.
so ideally you print 2 of them?
Yeah, exactly. Ideally, you print 2, and that should last you the playoffs, the regular season and the playoffs if you go all the way, right? So, but yeah, good question for sure. That being said, we've had guys submit these things on the back of cigarette packs and stuff like that. So we do appreciate it on the actual document, but it's not required. All right. So next up, we have forfeited games. So again, covered in detail in the roster regulations document. But just to go over it, there's different ways in which a team can forfeit a game. The first is if you're missing players. So you need a minimum of 5 players to start a game. So if you are less than 5, how it works is we don't just automatically give you a loss at the beginning. We award the other team 6 points every 5 minutes until you get to halftime, in which you lose the game 30-0. The second way to do it, which is a little more common, is by violating rules. And there's a bunch of rules to keep in mind. Exceeding the cap, either the QB cap or the team cap. They're 2 separate things altogether. Having an illegal player, so someone who's played on 3 teams already and you are now his 4th. In-game violations, again, based around the cap. So it's really important that you understand how this can happen and you know when not to do it or just in general not to do it at all. Very, very important to know that.
And Rob, if you are going to forfeit a game for whatever reason, I mean, you have half the team on vacation or whatever it is, if you already know that in advance, please let us know. We'll be able to inform the other team. They'll be able to either plan either a scrimmage with someone else or they have a free field available. We get to reallocate the referees and the scorekeepers and everything. So if that's something that you can't avoid for whatever reason, let us know. It's respect for your opponent, respect for the league and everything, and it helps us.
Absolutely. Good point, Alex. And at the same time, usually when people let us know way in advance, we try to do our best to find you some subs as well to try to avoid the forfeit altogether. But when it's unavoidable, at least you don't oblige the team to come out, on a Saturday night or Sunday night and basically realize that the other team isn't showing up. So like I write here, please be on top of things. It's your responsibility. So like some of the stuff we discussed earlier, keep all those things in mind. Pre-game, post-game, on the next slide, roster submission. So like I mentioned, the earlier the better as far as the game roster card goes. The scorekeeper really appreciates when you can show up, half an hour before your game, give them the roster so they can take care of that. If you need flags, this is important, especially for new teams. A lot of teams didn't get a chance to come pick up their flags. We have them available before the first game of the season and every game after that. All you need to do is go see the head scorekeeper. We sell them at $5 a unit. This is how they look when they're packaged, yellow or no, okay, it's okay. Yellow or red. Oh, this one's a green one for the little guys. But anyway, you get the picture. So we have them at the field. They're wrapped up and they're ready to go, and they're sold at $5 a piece, and they usually last people several years.
And you need them.
and you need them. Non-players are not permitted on the team bench. So what we mean by that, and of course some fields are more difficult than others. So for instance, we don't play there in the winter, but at Stade de Soccer in Brossard as well, we play in nice facilities where there's, the stands are separate from the benches. So it's really, there's a large distinct between the fan section and the player section. But when we play in domes like Loyola or Hebert or Catalonia, it's a little narrower and there's not as much of a differentiation. But we still ask that players and fans, girlfriends, parents be separate. It's just easier. We've seen bench penalties being given to people for people's mothers or people's girlfriends for engaging in something with the other team or an official. So it's important that you understand that you're responsible for everybody on your team bench. Oftentimes the same guys that will complain and say, hey, there are friends they're sitting on our bench, why not, are the same people that say, hey, that's not one of our players if ever there's a penalty. So you have to understand that anybody who's in the vicinity of your team bench is your responsibility. Post game, this is something that's really important with FPF, unfortunately, is that if you see, if someone plays in baseball or softball leagues, if they play hockey, there's an assigned bench. So after your hockey game ends, you basically leave the team bench, go to the changing room and change there. Same thing with softball. Unfortunately, with flag football, a lot of guys change right near the bench, but what's not fair is often we'll see teams play, their game will end. Usually they lose. They're moping on the bench. Sometimes they're celebrating, but they end up keeping the bench for the team that's playing after them, and that's not really fair. You see guys having to stand or kind of be out of the way when they should actually have their team bench. So what we kindly ask you to do and remember is that when your game ends, grab your stuff, go to the end zone, go somewhere else, and give the team that's playing the following game their bench.
Rob, we do have a question regarding the head scorekeeper concept. So, as a team captain, how do you know who is the head scorekeeper of a field?
Yeah, that's a great question, and sometimes we take for granted that everybody knows our scorekeepers, but for new guys, obviously that's not the case. So what you'll see is when you get to the field, obviously the referees are easy to spot, so you can always ask them if they can point you in the direction of a scorekeeper. Scorekeepers are usually the people that have a clipboard and a scoreboard in their hands, so you can ask any scorekeeper to basically point you in the direction of the head scorekeeper. Basically, the head scorekeeper is the person who's responsible for the field and that has the equipment bag. So they're the ones that carry the flag belts with them. Sometimes it'll be the scorekeeper on your field, sometimes it won't, but you'll kind of get the idea. Usually they'll say, oh, it's the guy on field 3 or the guy on field 1 or whatever the case may be. But just ask a referee or a scorekeeper or myself or Alex, even though you can't see his face right now if you don't know how he looks. You just ask us and they'll point you in the right direction. Good question. So, all right, moving on to the next slide is advice to captains. So, as you know, there's a penalty given for a player wearing jewelry in pockets. So, good idea before the game. Just give your guys a quick glance. If someone has an earring, someone has pockets in their shorts, it's important that you explain to them that they will be penalized for this. So, it's better to avoid it before the game. As a captain, we suggest you carry an extra pair of shorts or jersey with you in your bag. It's always a good idea. Guys forget stuff. I mean, in the end, you're the person running the team. It's always good to kind of plan ahead and keep game sheets, player contracts. Even though player contracts, you can scratch that. It's no longer valid. But game sheets, it's a good idea, like we said, to print out 10, have them ready for the season in your bag with a pen, and you're good to go. Registration fees, as everybody knows, for the men's number divisions are $2,025 per team. That's with tax and everything. For the other divisions, it's a little less. All fees are due by the end of week 3. One thing that's important that we're really trying to enforce over the last few years is the $350 referee fees be paid in cash. That will be sent in an email reminding teams. Referees obviously are paid in cash, so it makes our lives a little easier. Now that more and more teams pay by e-transfer, this has become a bigger issue for us. So we try to ask you to help us out on that front. So before week 3, so either week 1, 2, or 3, you can submit it to your scorekeeper, in a sealed envelope with your team name on it, or you can give it to me directly at the field if I'm around. But again, we ask that all teams do that, but we'll send a reminder email with a little more information for that. So next up, complex specific rules. So obviously, everybody knows that Flag Plus Football is not a landlord, but a tenant. So we rent field space from 5, 6, 7 different facilities over the course of a year. And all of these facilities have their own sets of rules in place. Some are a little stricter than others. So in the winter, we've had some issues over the last few years with Brossard in the sense that they are very strict about people coming onto their turf in their winter boots. And rightfully so. In the end, we like to play especially at Brossard, but at all fields on a nice turf. We don't want to play on an old, muffed up turf that is dirty and just not well maintained. So they ask us to not walk in with our boots. So what we're going to be doing this year is we'll have some plastic bags near the entrance. We'll ask people kindly when they walk in to just, if they want to change on the field, because if you change in a locker room, obviously it's a moot point. We'll ask you to just take your boots off, throw them in a plastic bag, walk over to your team bench, and then at the end of the game, once you're leaving, to do the same thing. Just change and just leave the plastic bag where you found it so someone else can use it. This is kind of our way of trying to help the Brossard facility work with them. But of course, we can say everything that we want. In the end, it's you, the players, that participate. And so we kindly ask you to just make everybody's life easier. We don't want to play cat and mouse with Brossard all season long. We love the turf that we're playing on. This is our ESOL, you know what I mean? So we ask that you please understand their understand and respect their wishes.
And Brossard does give you dedicated changing rooms that you can put a lock on. So
absolutely.
if you want to go ahead and go that route, you can go through that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and Alex, again with the Papineau Stade de Soccer in the summer, and here as well as a team captain, it's also a good idea. We were saying about having a pen and roster cards. Another thing is keeping a lock in your bag. I think it's a good idea. Like it's some of the facilities like Catalonia, most people don't change in the change rooms because they're in the main building and in the basement and it's far from where you're playing. But at Brossard, you guys have access. When you walk in, you see on a teleprompter, your assigned room, and you guys can change in there. You can shower in there. It's actually very clean. But of course, without a lock, it's not really safe. So have a lock with you and give yourselves that option. So, okay, next up we have, please do not throw the ball while others are using the field, especially non-FPF games. So in some of the facilities that we're at, like for instance the Catalonia Soccerplex Dome, there's very limited amount of space outside of where we play. So when we show up in soccer, whether it's youth soccer or adult soccer is playing before us, it's really not something that is very respectful towards them to be on the field throwing the ball around. I know that when we have games going on and other soccer leagues or whatever are doing that to us, we're obviously very upset about it, and we kind of throw them off the field, and deservedly so. So we ask that you do the same thing with them. When it's flag plus football games going on, obviously you have a bit more liberty because we're all part of the same community, although you should still be respecting the teams that are playing before you. So please keep that in mind and be courteous of everybody else. I put here Hébert end zones as an example. So when you play at Hébert, what's great is there's an east and west end zone on both sides of the dome with a ton of space, so you can warm up in there. Obviously, it's not available at all the places we play, but when you do have it at your disposal, we encourage you to use it and warm up. And finally, use of any drug or outside alcohol. And what I mean by outside alcohol is alcohol not purchased at the facility itself. In a change room can result in a permanent ban from the facility. So last year we had a situation with a team in particular at the Brossard complex. The staff caught them drinking their own beer, and we at FPF actually had to really, really go to bat for the team and ensure that they weren't going to be banned from the facility completely. But they basically got their one strike, and the next time they will be banned. So keep in mind, we have our finals in Brossard. FPF will not start changing our playoff schedule around to convene a team who was banned from a facility. So, again, we're the tenant. Please respect their wishes. If you guys want to drink, you can drink outside. But unfortunately, you can't, or you can purchase their alcohol, but we can't bring our own alcohol and drink it in their rooms. They're at risk of losing their alcohol permit, and obviously it's an important thing for them. So if we move on to the next slide, league discipline. So Alex, if we can go back to the website for a sec. Yes. You'll see that if you go to resources, there's a whole discipline section where we kind of break down the disciplinary committee, how we function, who's on the committee, all that stuff. We also have something new this year is if you're on the main menu, you click on About, and then you'll see something that says Code of Conduct. So that's kind of, especially for new teams, we encourage you to read through that. Flag Plus Football is, we pride ourselves on the culture of the league and the fact that we have very, very few altercations when it comes to punches being thrown and stuff like that. Stuff you see very regularly in hockey leagues, soccer leagues. This is something that we take very seriously, that we take a lot of pride in. And when new teams come in and maybe they've played in leagues where that's kind of just accepted or allowed, it's a harsh reality when they find out that it's absolutely not accepted here. So we ask that you read this before you start playing in the league and that you understand the ramifications that come with things like throwing a punch. So again, if we go back to the slide, major foul tracker, we keep track of stuff like we keep track of objectionable conduct penalties, unnecessary roughness penalties. These are met with a 5 plays off ban, and if you get a 3 of 1 over the course of the season, or 5 combined.
Four combined.
It's 4 combined.
Yeah.
You sure?
It's the 4.
Oh, you're right, because obviously 3. So this is a typo. Fix that up on my own computer that no one else sees. So maximum of 3 of 1 or 4 combined will result in an automatic 1-game suspension. So we'll be honest, that's quite strict. I mean, 4 of these over the course of a 10-week season can happen. It can happen relatively quickly, but again, this is something we have in place to try to get people to avoid receiving these major penalties. So keep those numbers in mind. And if you want to keep track of them over the course of the season, Alex, you can show them again on the main menu where to go.
Again, it's going to be under resources, and we have OC and UR.
Yeah, and you'll see a full table there with all the names of players. Something we should mention, Alex, that's important is that if player John Smith plays in Divisions 1, 2, and 3, his totals are combined. So that means that if he has, 3 OCs or 4, a combination of 4 over the course of 3 teams, then he still serves a 1-week suspension, meaning he would have to be sitting out 3 games, right? Because if you're suspended by week, you're missing your games in all your divisions. So it's quite difficult. If you're playing in a lot of divisions, it's even more, there's more onus on you to make sure that you don't rack up these major penalties.
And obviously, this isn't the only way to get suspended. In case of a large incident,
Yeah.
there's an investigation, the discipline gets involved, there's a write-up report. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other ways, so just avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, discipline is a major important, keep in mind with over 200 teams playing the league, people come here, we all have heard the quote, we work the next day, we work on Monday, and that's something we abide by. In the end, we expect people to play intensely and be competitive, but you have to understand that there's a line to be drawn, and it's drawn, and you should know when you're crossing it and when you're not, and you're responsible for your own actions. So that's it. So league discipline, we have DC, the disciplinary committee. It's a 3-person group made up of 1 referee and 2 player/staff members. And what they do is they'll receive a write-up from an official should something happen during the game. There's also a process for a 2-team altercation. So if there's an altercation between 2 players, so not a player and an official, but 2 players, the DC will reach out to the team captains, give them 1 chance to write kind of their side of the story, which the disciplinary committee will use in part of their decision-making process. So all this important stuff. Hopefully you don't have to deal with the disciplinary committee at all, but if you do, that's what they do. And if you want to read up a little more about how they work, like we said, you can find the information in the information section, I believe, or resources. All right, on to the next and last slide before we get to the new rules. Overall comportment on the field. Like we were right here, don't be that team. Respect your opponents and officials. There's always a handful of teams in FPF that give us some grief. Overall, 98% of the teams that play in the league are good groups of guys. They play competitive, they play intensely, but they know where that line is drawn. So don't be that team. Teams that other teams don't want to play against, that referees are kind of annoyed by. Just come out, have fun, but understand that in the end it is all for fun, and that's what it is. Next up, we have a renewed focus on weeding out the teams that cannot respect the rules and code of conduct. So those teams, any team can kind of get caught up in a bad situation, and that sort of stuff happens, and we understand that. But when it's kind of the repeat offenders that keep coming up, season after season, week after week, then those are the teams that we kind of slowly look to weed out, because it's just not the type of groups we want in FPF. Control the players who need controlling. So we all have, myself included, I play sports, and I have a few friends that are kind of the guys that tend to have the hot heads. As captain, know who those players are, keep them under control. As team captain, it's important that you kind of take that responsibility. If you're the one with the hot head, well, then make sure that you assign someone to keep you under control. And in the end, save yourself hassles of suspensions and all that stuff. So finally, on that note, enjoy yourselves. Good luck. Have a great season. Alex and I will just navigate through the overview page quickly before we get into some of the new rules, and then of course we'll move on to questions if there are any. So Alex, maybe you can just kind of use one of the divisions as an overview, as an example, and go through like tie breaks, playoff standings, playoff breakdown, the playoff schedule as well.
Sure, no problem. So we're actually going to be looking at Division 2. I just happened to pick them. So you'll see here that we have the division standings. So all the teams are listed. You even have your weekly leaders, which are going to display at the bottom. At the top, you actually have the season leaders, so you can filter by different categories in here, which is pretty cool. As I mentioned before, so you have your tiebreak info, which will show you your breakdown. Usually it's wins, a head-to-head. Then you have some form of plus-minus, but usually it's points allowed, so on the defensive side.
Yeah.
Then point differential. And then you go into strength of schedule and coin toss and everything, but usually we don't get all the way there.
Yeah.
And then same thing for 3 or more teams. The only thing is there's no head-to-head in this particular breakdown. For the playoff breakdown, so each one of these is going to be different. For Division 2, 12 teams qualify for the postseason, but again, check for each one of your specific divisions to actually get that information. To see your playoff schedule, so you're going to go underneath the schedule tab of your division. And then inside there, you obviously have your regular season, which will list out week 1 to 11. And then you have the playoffs, which will show your divisional playoff, your quarter playoffs, your semifinals, and then your championship finals. Each of these is already pre-scheduled, which is very important to know. So if you know that, for example, in Division 2, you're going to be on vacation March 25th, well, you're going to miss your playoff game. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
There's no way to move these around. There's no way to give preferential treatment. It's just whatever seed you get is whatever slot you get here.
And something that I can just mention here is for playoff scheduling. So some people in the past have said, oh, you know, like we should go by, we should implement the schedule builder process, or we can, you know, use if one team is playing another and the top team is the home seed or the higher seed, then they should get preference. But as you can imagine, you know, if we need to do stuff like that, we need to wait for the playoffs to actually start to know which seed is which. And then we're giving people way too last second of a draw. Not to mention we're kind of limited to a certain amount of fields that we have pre-booked. So instead, what we've always done, and which has worked for us, is that we set the schedule way in advance. So now it's already up before the season starts. All the dates for each round per division are unique. So what that means is that if you're in Division 2, divisional playoffs, it's not that we're saying, okay, you may play on the 25th or the 27th. There's nothing left up in the air. Every date is locked in for each round. So you can safely send this to all your teammates and say, guys, we're in Division 2, so we know that if we make the finals, these are the 4 dates for the finals. Make sure you guys are available. If you work on weekends, if you work weeknights, try to arrange yourselves. So what we're doing is we're putting the onus on you to say, hey, we did our part with letting you know way in advance what the dates are. They will not be moved. We will not accommodate people who are last second planners over people who planned in advance, because that's not fair. We're putting them out now, and just do your best to accommodate. We understand that some stuff, obviously, there are cases where just people have stuff that's booked, and unfortunately it is what it is. A wedding or whatever, you can't move that. But these are the dates, so hopefully you can plan ahead. And if you know some guys, like Alex just mentioned, if you know some guys are missing a playoff game or 2, then maybe you want to think about adding another player to your roster to make sure that you have enough guys in the playoffs. So that's it. So Alex kind of went through the division overview page, which I think is good. At least you kind of know how to navigate through that. We had shown you earlier about box scores. So where you see the stats for your game, you can actually toggle over and see the roster stuff, the caps. So that stuff is all there. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to write to us right away. So now we'll go back to the PowerPoint template and get into the new rules. So Alex and I are both not officials, although Alex is part of the rules committee for FPF. So he was there voting on each of the rules that were brought forth. The rules brought forth were all brought by the players in FPF, by officials, by staff members, and then voted on through our 6-man panel. And if there's ever a tiebreak, then I would be the tiebreak, but I never was called upon this season, so even better that way. So rule number 1 that we changed, and Alex, by all means, jump in if there's anything to add. The first change that was voted in was the touchdown change as far as spot. As far as actually the goal line. So the ball and flags now must enter the goal for a touchdown. So what we've seen in the past is that it used to only be the flag belt. So if the flag belt crossed the goal line, then that's where the ball was spotted. And that's still the rule anywhere else on the field. It's always where the flag belt is. But when it comes to the goal line, what we saw in some rare circumstances is that people maybe on the front corner of the end zone caught a ball right on the sideline, and the ball was probably at the 2-yard line once their arms were really extended catching it. Only their flag belt was over the goal line, and we awarded a touchdown. But again, it just didn't seem right that a ball not crossing the goal line would be considered a score. So what we did is we changed this rule to ensure that both the flag and the ball now have to be past the goal line. In a case where both are not, then the ball will be spotted where the outside item was basically deemed to be. So if you can picture it on a play that I just described, where someone has their toes in the front corner of the end zone and the ball is maybe at the 1 when they catch it and they fall out of bounds, well, the ball will be spotted on the 1. Inversely, if someone stretches out the ball and the ball crosses the plane, but the flags are, let's say, at the half-yard line or 1-yard line, well, then the ball will be spotted at that half or 1-yard line. So moving on to the next point. Foul by the ball carrier. So people who are more familiar with flag football at the collegiate level, like CJEP High School also. How it works is that when a ball carrier commits any foul, for instance, charging or flag guarding, most often, the officials will kill the play. That's how it's done in RSEQ football and pretty much anywhere else. But we didn't have it that way in the past. We would actually let the play continue. So this is different. The ball will now be the play will be whistled down now as soon as the player commits the foul. So if you flag guard, the referee will blow the play dead. If the ball carrier commits a foul on 4th down with yards not gained, ball is turned over. In all cases, penalty yardage will apply. If the ball carrier commits a foul on a convert, the convert will be unsuccessful and the yardage will carry over. If this happens in overtime, the attempt is unsuccessful, but only major fouls can carry over to the next convert. We don't have to worry about that for 11 weeks. But so basically that's what it is. The play is whistle dead and the yardage is then penalized right thereafter.
So in terms of a before and after, I catch a ball with the receiver, I'm running downfield, I flag guard a guy. The referee throw the flag, but the play continues. I can effectively run myself into the end zone, duke a whole bunch of people, or potentially the defense commits a penalty along the way, and then they have to figure out how to actually rule it. So what happens now is that the moment I hit that flag guard, the flag gets thrown by the referee, and the play is blown dead right away.
Yeah, and what's good about this is, the flow of the game will be a bit quicker. We know that players always want as many plays as possible, the game to run as quickly as possible. So this kind of shortens things up a bit. And secondly, as a defensive player, what happens is in the past, you gave yourself the opportunity to kind of create a foul on your own that would negate the original foul by the ball carrier.
You had to speculate what the original foul was to be like, well, was it a flag guard? Do I have to go tackle him?
Exactly. So now that's no longer an issue. And, for those who are common with RSEQ football or anything else in flag at the scholar level, then essentially we're enforcing it the same way. So if we move to point number 3, very simple, wearable technology. This is something that obviously in 2018 is relevant, but we are not permitting players to wear any wearable technology. Most common Fitbit bands or GoPros attached to their chest or their head or anything like that. If you want to wear, like a calorie burning tracker or a step counter under a wristband, you didn't hear it from me, but it's something that you can try to do, and then obviously risk getting a penalty if the referee finds it. But that's something that ideally, as long as it's covered under a thick wristband, then obviously the hard parts are not showing. So you could try that, but it's still technically a violation of the rules.
And this is actually a clarification of a rule we already had. You couldn't wear jewelry, you couldn't wear any of those wearables to begin with, but we had nothing specifically on the technology side, which is becoming more and more common.
Exactly. All right, so next one, rusher offside reset. So if a rusher jumps offside, what part of the body needs to reset in order to go? So this was something that amongst our officials, we realized there was a big discrepancy in how people were actually calling this. Some people would say the whole body has to be behind. Other people said, just a foot has to go behind the beanbag. This also is applicable for when someone sets up, not when they're resetting, but when a rusher is actually set up to rush at the very start of the play. And essentially what we deemed now to clarify is anything on the ground, so your feet or your hands, must be behind the rush bag to be onside. Applicable to initial positioning, like I just mentioned, or when you're getting back onside after a reset. So what this means is if you're offside, you jump, the quarterback snaps on 2 and you kind of jump the gun a little early. When you come back, even if your head is over the beanbag, if your nose is over the beanbag, if your arms are over, it doesn't matter. It's whatever's on the ground. So if you're someone that wants to, touches the ground when you reset or whatever, well then your hand has to be behind the bag. Same thing with your feet. Anything that's in contact with the ground has to be reset behind the beanbag. And like I said, even originally when you're setting up, some people, lean over the bag or whatever. There's no rule now that says your whole body has to be behind the bag. That is no longer an issue. It's only what's touching the ground.
And if you're in a 3-point stance, you don't need to return to a 3-point stance if he triggered you.
Yeah,
you just have to be, everything that's on the floor has to be behind the bag.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the next one, offensive pass interference. So previously there were basically you would be able to accept the penalty or decline it. Now we've added two options when accepting the penalty for an offensive OPI, so as the defensive team accepting. The first is a loss of 10 yards from the previous line of scrimmage, downs repeated. The second one instead is a loss of down from the previous line of scrimmage, downs continued, and on 4th down, loss of the ball. So I'm no rules expert. we usually have Jason Leclerc here with us to handle that. I don't know if you want to weigh in on something, Eags.
I mean, basically beforehand, let's say there was a push-off in the end zone for whatever reason. As a defense, the only choice you had was to take the penalty, which basically gave the offense another play just 10 yards back. So again, they can just chuck it into the air, and if it doesn't get called, maybe it's another touchdown or whatever it is. So in this case over here, you can basically make them lose the down. The play doesn't count, and it's as if the play never happened pretty much. So in that fourth down scenario where they're going to throw up a jump ball and there's a push-off, they catch it, you can basically accept the penalty by making them lose the down, and then it just downs continue.
Okay. Do you know when it would, like, for you as the defensive captain, when would you choose one over the other? Just to kind of give some
when I
guidance
don't
on
want to back them up 10 and I want to burn it down.
Okay. Simple enough. All right. So moving on to the next one. Game clock after a TCV here, which is actually time count violation penalty. So for people who've been playing FPF for a long time, they know that it's a running clock. It only stops, obviously, on a timeout, on a technical timeout, on a major injury at halftime or at the end of the game. But now what we've done is to try to avoid people from wasting time by taking time count violation penalties. The clock will now stop after a time count violation and will restart at the snap. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Rob, we do have a question about the offside and about the concept of a free play for the quarterback. So how exactly would that work? If you're a quarterback and you try and get the rusher to jump, the rusher jumps, do you just run the play like normal? You would look for the flag, or how does that work?
Yeah, good question. I guess it's not as clear as it would be in tackle, because in tackle the flag goes up right away. And you have a free play as a quarterback and you can throw the ball downfield. How it works in Flag Plus is that it's only a penalty once the person crosses the line of scrimmage. So what we mean is that if you're a quarterback, you're taking the snap and you see that the rusher jumps the gun and he crosses the rusher bag before the ball is snapped, then technically he's offside. But it's not a penalty until he crosses the line of scrimmage. A lot of teams will say that. They'll say, "Hey, he was offside. He jumped." But unless if the rusher is offside and he just declares he's not gonna rush the quarterback anymore, then he's not gaining an advantage, right? So how it works is once the rusher passes the line of scrimmage, when he's offside, then the penalty flag is thrown. If he never crosses the line of scrimmage, or if he backs up, resets, and then comes, then neither of those are a penalty. The only time it's a penalty is when he jumps the gun and then crosses the line of scrimmage. Good question. And that's something that comes up often in games. All right.
Number 7.
Number 7.
This is a fun one.
Yeah, so this is a big one. So what we did is we decided to change a major rule as far as snaps are concerned. So for anyone that's been playing in FPF, whether it's a season or 10 seasons, they know that when the ball hits the ground, automatically it is dead. So in some other leagues, so in touch football, for instance, obviously in tackle football, the ball is not dead when it touches the ground necessarily, when the ball is snapped. So what we did is we changed our rule a bit. The reason and rationale really behind why we did this is to free up our head official from having to stare down the quarterback as closely and to be able to actually watch some of the contact on the line of scrimmage a little more closely. This was a decision that we made based on mechanics. So what we did now is we changed the rule to a snap that skips off the ground in front of the quarterback and is immediately recovered is a live ball. So in the past, if a quarterback got a snap that even just grazed the ground or was trapped on the ground, then the ball would automatically be the play would be whistled dead, and the ball would be spotted where the ball.
If the referee saw it actually touch the ground.
Exactly.
And you always had the offense screaming, "No, it's good." The defense screaming, "Oh, it touched the ground," and then it's
which is tough, right? And even for the officials, they're looking, and it's obviously there's no replay and stuff like that, and sometimes it would be really like a matter of centimeters. So now that ball is actually live. A snap that is dropped by the QB, however, will be blown dead. So what that means is if the quarterback receives a snap, it bobbles it and then drops the ball, or if it hits any part of his body and hits the ground thereafter, then the ball is considered dead. If the snap is over the QB's head and hits the ground, the play is dead. This is unchanged from how it was in the past. So we don't want quarterbacks, running backwards, chasing the ball with their back to the rusher who's also chasing them. It's a matter of safety. It's just not really clean and not what we wanted to do. So that was left as is. So really the rule change is only for balls that are snapped and that skip off the ground, that short hop off the ground, that the quarterback fields cleanly. If the referee feels that safety is ever an issue, so that we don't want a rusher and a quarterback kind of both looking down towards the ground and trying to grab the ball or anything like that. Obviously there's no fumble, so the rusher cannot recover the ball, but I think it's just football instinct to try to go for the ball. We don't want collisions, we don't want head-to-head, anything like that. So safety first. If the referee feels any issue there, then they'll blow the play dead as well. And last but not least is the fake handoff. So this is something that wasn't super clear, and I think that needed to be reworded. So what it is the offense lining up a player in the backfield does not mean the defense can rush from less than 7 yards. So what some teams tended to think in the past was if a quarterback is lined up at 5 yards, they have a halfback right beside them, then automatically people said, okay, well, there's someone in the backfield, so I don't need to wait for my rusher to cross the line of scrimmage in order for me to go. I should also explain that the rule right now is that you need to be at 7 yards to be able to rush the quarterback, or basically rush any player behind the line of scrimmage. But what the other rule is after that is once the player who's lined up at 7 yards, or any player lined up at 7 yards, crosses the line of scrimmage, then any other player, even if you're not lined up at 7, is then able to cross the line of scrimmage.
Or if there's an actual handoff, in which case the player is live,
exactly.
in which case then it's free for
Absolutely. So if there's a handoff, then of course anybody can attack the ball carrier. But now to eliminate that gray area, what we've clarified is that if there's a clear feint made to hand off the ball, so what some guys do is they'll run their wildcat offense, they'll kind of pit the ball in the stomach of the ball carrier, anything like that, any fake pitch, anything that was deemed as a clear fake to hand off the ball or pitch the ball or lateral the ball, then all rules are off, and basically someone who is not at 7 yards is allowed to pass the line of scrimmage and enter into the offensive backfield to try to deflag the quarterback or anybody else who possesses the ball. So simple as that. So that is it for our rules. So as far as questions go, are there any?
We've been answering them as we go along. Thanks to the people who have been asking us questions. If you do have questions, go ahead and enter them into the YouTube live chat. Else, you can go ahead and reach out to us at info@flagplusfootball.com, post on our Facebook wall, join our group, etc. We're always here to answer those questions. So if you do have any, we'll stick by for about 30, 45 seconds to see if there's anything that's straggling. If not, have yourselves a wonderful winter 2018 season.
And maybe in those quick 30 to 45 seconds, Eagle, you can maybe talk a bit about the media, what we offer to new teams.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, the media component of Flag Plus is pretty large. We have weekly articles that will be posted per division or in some general structure to give you content throughout the week in terms of what's going on, be it kind of previews of games that are coming up or breaking down games that already happened. We have our power rankings, which everyone loves to see their name listed on it. Sometimes we have some head-to-heads. We have some fantasy type of breakdowns. Then on top of that, we also have weekly podcasts. We're going to try and adjust the format this year just a little bit. So we're going to have more details for you in the next little bit. But yeah, just to let you know, keep your heads up on that front. The best way to reach out to us is using social media. So Twitter @FlagPlus. Obviously, we have our Facebook group and our page. Instagram as well. Snapchat. So yeah, just keep in touch with us, and we'll give you updates along the way.
All right. Thanks a lot, Eagle.
We do have some questions. One of them is relating to the referee fee, and it's $350. That's included within the total of the 2025.
Yeah, it is. It's included in the total fee.
Yeah,
Just paid
so
separately.
basically it would be, and I'm doing quick math here, $16.75, something like that.
I'm not sure. I would have to see it because there's also PST and GST that are included in there.
Oh,
so
okay.
you can email me. I see it's Frank Scalzo who can email me, and I'll break it down for you. I'll send it all in the invoice that each team gets.
Great. And we have another question regarding a forward pass behind the line of scrimmage. Is that considered a run or a pass? We consider that a run.
Yeah, so basically, to try to understand this rule as easily as possible, is forget about the flight of the ball, determining if it's a pass or a run like you would see in tackle football. Instead, think of it as how the ball crosses the line of scrimmage. If it's in flight, so if it's in the air, then it's considered a pass. If it's in possession, then it's considered a run. So technically, if I'm the quarterback, just speaking as an extreme here, I drop back 30 yards, I throw a 20-yard forward pass that's caught 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage, clearly a forward pass, but then is ran past the line of scrimmage, then it's still considered a run. So it's really how the ball crosses the line of scrimmage. Good question.
And I think that's it.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay tuned for the French video. All right. Have a good one.